Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Josh Groban, titled Stages. You know, it seems I've been breaking a number of rules that I've traditionally held for myself, and today it looks like we're going to be tackling one of the biggest examples of that, because everybody who begged me to cover Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett's Cheek to Cheek back in 2014, and were put off that I didn't really have any interest in covering that, are probably going to be exasperated that I'm reviewing this. Because, hey, wasn't it his personal rule that he didn't review albums full of covers? But in the lead up to talking about this album, I began wondering why that is. After all, I'll talk about covers when they appear on the album, and there are plenty of examples where a well-positioned cover is just as thematically appropriate. It can work within the structure of the album. Not really the case when you have a selection of Broadway covers put together by a classically trained operatic pop artist who's more well known for his jaw-dropping vocal talents than his songwriting or cohesive albums, but you know what, it could work. And let's be honest here, I knew Lady Gaga would do a fine job with Tony Bennett. Gaga's done that sort of material before, she's got classical training, Tony Bennett's a veteran, and as such, it didn't really interest me in the same way. And after listening to the album a couple of times, I realized I had nothing I could really say about it, outside of saying that it sounded exactly like I expected it would. This is slightly different for two reasons. The first being, well, it's Josh Groban. I'll admit I do really like the guy. His material's never had stunning depth in the lyrics, but the man has the pipes, charisma, and power to elevate less than stellar songwriting, and I hold that his more complex 2010 record Illuminations that he mostly wrote himself, that actually had a Nick Cave cover of all things, is actually a pretty damn excellent record. I recommend it. It's probably his best. My issue with him is that I've always wanted to see his material with a little bit less polish, see him get a little bit more visceral, challenge that incredible voice of his, and test his emotional range. Now, some of you might think that doing an album of Broadway covers might be flying in the exact opposite direction of that, but look at the shows he chose. Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, Into the Woods, and Sweeney Todd, and of course, a track from my favorite musical of all time, Chess. Sure, we're not crossing that many boundaries, but there's enough material to really push the guy, and I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. That said, I didn't exactly have high expectations, and I'll admit that the theater geek in me comes down really hard on musical adaptations. So, what did Josh Groban deliver with Stages? Well, unfortunately, I was given all the more proof that I should probably avoid covers albums like this, because Stages by Josh Groban gave me very little really to work with. I probably would outright skip this album on a busier week because there's not a lot here. I'm not saying the record is bad, far from it really. It's exactly as competently staged and well performed as you would expect from a better Josh Groban record. The better word for it though is inoffensive. Not quite a vanity project, because it still is kind of a risk releasing a record of theater covers to an audience that won't usually know or care about Broadway, but it is a calculated risk. And as such, there's not a single cover on this record that feels challenging, innovative, or remotely interesting to me as a critic to really dissect without going into all-out comparisons with the original source material or other stage productions. And fair warning, that might end up happening. In other words, the album is decent enough, I guess. Josh Groban does what he wants to do, I think, but overall it didn't leave a lot of an impression on me. So okay, let's start with instrumentation and production. And really, it sounds exactly like you would expect a Josh Groban record to sound. Graceful pianos and guitars, elegant strings, hints of backing vocals and reverb to add the necessary swell when you need it, and nothing with the slightest edge or bite to it in the production to add any sort of texture. A little exasperating when you consider that Illuminations, or at least the overproduced All That Echoes, at least tried for something a little bit more here, but really it's all intended to place the focus on Josh Groban's voice and his covers. That being said, there are a few tracks where something more interesting in the instrumentation does creep in. Electric guitar shows up in the background of What I Did for Love from a chorus line, if you do listen closely, and Groban actually recruited trumpet player Chris Botti for the Finian's Rainbow song Old Devil Moon. It's actually integrated really quite well, I liked it. But after the first few listens of this record, you'll notice that the covers that Josh Groban selected play very much to a similar template and style. And by that I mean piano-driven power ballads. This drives you into the issue of variety. Yes, it plays very well to Josh Groban's conventional strengths, but it also means that even despite coming from unique musicals, the covers start to run together a little bit for me, especially considering the majority of them play to broad generalities lyrically. There isn't enough changes in tone, which even his previous records got that, and to some extent this is also an issue with Josh Groban himself as a performer, and it's also where we get into kind of tricky territory, because let's be honest, the guy has an impressive voice, a great range, and a ton of natural power that allows him to belt with impressive gusto, which makes it kind of odd that more of this album doesn't play to his his baritone tenor range. Instead, many of the covers play to a slightly higher vocal register, where Groban still has power and volume, but doesn't quite have the same swell and sounds like a lot more work for him to sing. But all this ties into a greater issue: emotive presence. Now, this is an issue that can come with classically trained vocalists like Groban, stepping toward this brand of theater that, sure, they can hit the notes of clarity and power, but can they convey the emotional context behind their vocals? Can they really make the songs believable? Without it, there's a certain stiffness that can creep into their vocals that doesn't quite feel raw or real to me, even if they have enough pure charisma like Josh Groban has to carry these songs. Now, in the past, he's been kind of hit and miss in this area. When given potent dramatic material that demands that sort of energy, he can drive this home without fail. He's got the talent. But more complex songwriting or framing, or material that demands a little bit more subtlety, well, Illuminations proves that he was capable of pulling it off if he wrote it himself, but all that echo shows that if he didn't have enough dramatic material, the songs could sound pretty but emotionally uninvolving, which is the worst thing possible when you've got a vocalist like Groban, whose voice is so clean and poised that if the songwriting drops into your typical power ballad mold, it becomes very easy for me to just tune out, if only because he's made so many songs in that mold thus far. And thus it gets all the more frustrating that Groban didn't opt for more challenging or varied tracks from the musicals that he did choose. Take the duet he did with Kelly Clarkson from Phantom of the Opera, All I Ask of You, basically the poor man's music of the night, down to the chord progressions even. Now I get why Josh Groban chose this song. It's more well known, it plays to a more classical romantic archetype, which is pretty common on this record, but Music of the Night is a more interesting track lyrically. It would have required Josh Groban to show off a more complex emotive presence. It also wouldn't have involved much more of Kelly Clarkson. I mean, it gives her best shot, and she did do better than I expected, but her voice is too breathy. It doesn't quite have the stately presence that a proper portrayal of Christina would need, especially considering that Groban already got Audrey McDonald from If I Loved You from Carousel, or take the Sondheim double feature Children Will Listen from Into the Woods and Not While I'm Around from Sweeney Todd. I mean, I like both these songs, and the compositions of the mashup, it is well executed, but you know what? I can't help but feel that Josh Groban would have been a much better fit for songs like Agony or Joanna. Force him to flex those dramatic muscles a little bit more. Besides, Agony's awesome. Hell, he does a lot better with the lesser known Sondheim track Finishing the Hat from Sunday in the Park with George. And then there's Bring 'Em Home from Les Mis. And I'll give Josh Groban this song is brutally difficult to sing, especially for somebody with his vocal range. And he does a damn great job with it, one of the best songs on the album. But on some level, his voice might have been just a better fit for Stars or Who Am I? Sure, he covered Empty Chairs and Empty Tables as well on this record, but then again, it's on the bonus disc, and it should have been swapped in for the completely pointless and done to death Somewhere Over the Rainbow on this album. I'm serious, I'm not the biggest fan of the song as it is, and it did not need to be here. So okay, fine. Josh Groban didn't experiment as much as I had hoped he did, instead picking a subsection of covers that most would deem pretty safe with his range and vocal style. Did he at least do a solid job with the songs that he chose? Honestly, it's tough here. I mean, he's got the pipes, but it's rare he steps up with the same level of organic emotive presence to match his musical predecessors, even if he's got a better voice than them. Hate to say it, but the original version of Gene Wilder's Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, pretty damn close to untouchable at this point. Even though Groban does give it a pretty solid effort, he can't quite convey it in the same way Wilder did. His gender swap version of What I Did for Love, it's a valiant effort, but even despite how much I do really like the song, it doesn't favor his vocal range being sung in that register. And then there's Anthem from Chess. And look, it's impossible for me to be unbiased here, given it's my favorite musical, my favorite song from that musical, and the 2001 complete cast album is pretty damn incredible, usually the high bar for that musical. But man, it's probably Josh Groban's best shot at the song yet, but I don't know, it's not enough yet. In other cases, he does rise to the occasion. I like his more acoustic theme approach to Try to Remember from the Fantastics, and Old Devil Moon from Phineas Rainbow, as I already said, and his version of You'll Never Walk Alone from Carousel definitely plays to his strengths. If anything, the earnestness of old Broadway tunes, it's a natural fit for Josh Groban. I'm a little baffled he didn't choose to go a little bit deeper into that category in that era of old Broadway. But then again, who aside from theater geeks will actually know that song? That's the conundrum you hit here. In other words, Stages by Josh Groban feels a little bit compromised to me. As I said, it's harmless, but it feels caught between Josh Groban wanting to play to his wider audience and go for deep cuts in Sondheim. And as such, you can't nearly go as dark or as edgy as the better material might allow, because that might tarnish his pristine image, even though I know from the past that he is capable of going in more complex direction. In other words, it's an analogous problem to All That Echoes. And at this point in Josh Groban's career, there's less excuses for playing it this safe, especially considering he's got an audience that will buy everything he makes, even if the experiments don't really work. So why not push the envelope a little bit more? As it is for me, it's a strong 6 out of 10 and a recommendation if you're a fan of Josh Groban or musicals, or if you just want to argue about who did it better. But otherwise, if you're curious, but Josh Groban seems to be falling into a holding pattern with every release that gets less interesting, and that does worry me. I still like the guy, but you know what? He can do more here. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, a bit of an odd choice for an album to cover, and I know you're gonna get into arguments about who did it better in the comments. Just please stay civil here. In other words, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'm all ears. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.